please welcome to the stage OneGoal CEO and co-founder, Jeff Nelson.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. So first of all, Sarah did not mention that she was going to, first of all, it is very bright up here, so bear with me. Sarah did not let me know that the speakers after her were going to set a stage that was absolutely impossible to follow, but I'm going to do my best. First of all, to Evelyn and AJ in particular, the model that you continue to give to our organization, you said some quote about how OneGoal has had an impact in your life. You have a far greater impact on all of us. And so thank you so much for giving that model again. So I'm going to attempt as much as I possibly can to weave together all of what we've heard tonight before passing the baton to our final speaker, Mike. I'm going to do so in a quote, and then a story, and then leave you with a question. So let's start with the quote. The greatest danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and actually reaching it. Michelangelo wrote these words before painting the Sistine Chapel, one of the most staggering, transformational, awe-inspiring pieces of artwork in human history. I'd ask you to keep those words, his words, in your mind until we leave tonight, in part because I cannot get them out of mine. The story. So as Sarah beautifully said, I was a little bit younger 10 years ago. On this evening, we were at the University Club. Some of you were in that room. There was a lot less people and a few less balloons. And it was a much less hip experience than we're having tonight. We were honoring the first 30 students who were really our pioneers, whose shoulders we would eventually stand upon. They were giants, and they are giants. One of those young people was a fellow named Chris. And I got to know Chris really, really well. One of the benefits of the early days was that I was not just the ED or CEO, but I was also the director of teacher support and everything in between. So Chris was one of our students who made a remarkable increase in his grade point average in the first 2 years of OneGoal. In fact, he almost doubled his GPA in 2 years, which is nearly statistically impossible, but it's not. And a few of our board members, some of whom are still in the room tonight, asked if Chris could come to one of our board meetings and share some words of wisdom. And I can remember this summer, warm, humid day in Chicago, literally like it was yesterday. We were at a law firm, fancy law firm, downtown Chicago, and Chris said he'd love to share a few words. So Chris came, he had his printed speech, he read his speech, it was beautiful, it was poignant, we clapped, and he was about to leave. And Daryl Williams, and sorry, Daryl, I did not tell you I was going to speak about you. You're here somewhere, I assume. So Daryl was our board chair at the time, an extraordinary board chair. And Daryl said, Chris, can I ask you a question before you leave? And Daryl did one of these things where he sort of leaned in as if to have an intimate one-on-one conversation around a board table of 15 people. And he said, Chris, I got to ask you, what the heck happened? Don't get me wrong, we are immensely proud of you, but what you just shared in your speech does not line up with almost doubling your GPA in 2 years. So what happened? So Chris looks over to me at the side of the table as if to get the green light. I shrugged. He pushes away his sheet of paper and says, Mr. Williams, I attend a school in the South Shore community called the School of Entrepreneurship. And because of that, I have been in a startup class during my freshman year. And it just so happened that while I was taking that course, I also learned some data about my school. And the data that I learned was that less than 2% of African American boys in my school will go on to complete a college degree. And I remember thinking to myself, Mr. Williams, that if I had walked into any room with a business plan that had a 2% chance of succeeding, not only would I have been shown the door, I would have been laughed on the way out. And so I spent my time in other endeavors that had a higher likelihood than 2%. Until sophomore year. I'm walking down the hall and Miss Woodard, of all people, Miss Jocelyn Woodard, walks up to me in the hall, pulls me aside and says simply, "Chris, I see you and I want you in my class." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I think you can change the world." And I said, "I think you have the wrong Chris." She didn't smile. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Chris, I see you, and I want you in my class." I remember going onto the website that evening and looking at different data at OneGoal. And so the next day, I went to work at school, and I haven't stopped. You can imagine in this boardroom, we were as silent as this room. And Daryl was the first one to speak. He says, "First, thank you. And second, I wish my son had Miss Woodard." And then the board member next to Daryl said, "And I wish my daughter had OneGoal." That evening, I could not sleep. And the reason I could not sleep is because Chris had given us the business plan. We needed to figure out some way in which every student like Chris had a Miss Woodard, and every Miss Woodard had a OneGoal. And if we could do those two things, Chris and his classmates would change the world. All we would have to do is get out of the way. Now, that was 10 years ago. And in many ways, Chris and his fellow pioneers have changed the world. Those first 30 students have become 12,000. Those first 6 educators have become almost 500 this year. Those first 3 schools have become 220, not in one city, but across 6 states. And our alumni, like you have begun to learn tonight, are artists. They are educators. They are civic leaders. They are business leaders. They are staff at OneGoal. They are moms, they are dads, they are aunts, they are uncles, they are community members, and they are community leaders. And so make no mistake, Chris has changed the world, and so have his classmates. So that's part one. But as Sarah, let me say it this way, if you have ever been to a OneGoal event or spent any time with us, this term constructively dissatisfied is probably our greatest competitive advantage. And so while there is so much to be grateful for the example that Chris and so many others have given us, we have not solved the problem. So the question that I cannot get out of my head right now is, what is our Sistine Chapel? Let me offer one idea. What would it take to completely close the degree divide in this city in 10 years? What would it take to close the degree divide in this city in 10 years? Now, if I had asked that question 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it would have been completely conceptual and hypothetical in nature. It's not. Here's why. In the last few years, we have been testing a new way to deliver the OneGoal course. It's got a funky acronym name, et cetera, like OneGoal, but it's actually really simple. Typically, our teachers teach OneGoal for one period out of their academic schedule for 25 students. In this new model, they teach OneGoal full-time. So instead of one period a day, they teach OneGoal for 5 periods a day. So instead of 25 students, they teach 125 students each day. Now, the reason it was an experiment was because we had a question that we were trying to answer. And the question was, if you 5x'd the number of students for a teacher, would they be able to come anywhere near the results that OneGoal has been known for? And while we are not finished with that experiment, not at all, we got the first-year data back from the University of Chicago. We've got a lot of our research friends in the room tonight. And the first-year results are remarkable. Not only are students in this far greater expanded model achieving the same outcomes as their peers, in some cases they're exceeding those standards. So that, for me, begs the question, what would it take to have the OneGoal course on the academic schedule of every single student in CPS? The question is answered simply as it would take 600 teachers or counselors teaching OneGoal full-time to serve the third largest district in the United States of America. Now, I don't know if 600 to you seems big or small. Two pieces of comparison. First, that is less people that are in this room tonight. And secondly, there are 35,000 employees at CPS today, so that's less than 2% of payroll. I am not suggesting that we do this tomorrow. What I am suggesting is that if we, alongside our extraordinary district partners at CPS, our amazing evaluation and research colleagues at University of Chicago, our extraordinary college partners, of which there are 30 or so in the metro area, our nonprofit allies, our for-profit partners, all of you in the room and all of your friends, if we consistently together committed to that objective as a unit, I think we close the degree divide in 10 years legitimately. So the greatest danger for most of us is that we not set our aim too high and fall short, but that we set our aim too low and actually reach it. I don't know about you, but I would far prefer the former to the latter. Which brings me back to that boardroom with Chris one last time. So Daryl, after his second speech, Daryl was the first one to talk. There was another board member, and then there was a third board member who closed us out, not with a statement, but with a question. Her name was Marjorie. And Marjorie asked Chris, what do you think it would take to have OneGoal for every student in South Shore School of Entrepreneurship? Chris paused, he thought about it, and he said two things. First, I honestly don't know. But second, how could we possibly not try that? So the question for us tonight is, while there is so much gratitude from me and so many others to go around in this room for all that you have helped create in the last decade, we need you more in the next decade than we needed you in the last. And so it is all of our jobs to continue to ask everyone in this community, like we do our fellows and alums, like we do our program directors, like I do and we do our staff, to give more. And so before we close out, I want to call up our final speaker tonight, a good and dear friend of mine, Mike Gampson. Let me give you a very quick introduction. Mike is a national board member of ours. He was a Chicago board member before that. He's a remarkable community leader. More importantly, he is a dear friend, and he has been modeling to us as an organization what it means to dream big and follow through with a plan. So Mike, why don't you close us out tonight?